The late afternoon sun in the suburb of Crestview was the kind that made everything look softer. It washed over trimmed lawns and quiet houses painted in shades of beige and blue. On Elm Street, the air was cool and carried the smell of damp earth from a recent watering. An old man stood on the sidewalk, a figure of stillness amidst the occasional passing car. His name was Arthur Hawthorne. He was 72 years old, and he moved through the world with a considered pace. That day, he wore a brown tweed cap, a wool coat over a neat sweater, and pressed trousers. His hands, spotted with age, rested on the polished handle of a cherrywood cane. His walk from his daughter's house, just 3 blocks over, was his daily ritual. A way to keep the stiffness in his knees at bay. He had paused by a car. It wasn't just any car. It was a vintage Mercedes-Benz, a 197128 OSE in a deep forest green. The paintwork shone like liquid glass. Arthur felt a smile touch his lips. He had a weakness for beautiful machines, for the craftsmanship of a bygone era. This particular model was special. He leaned in a little, his nose almost touching the cool window, peering inside. The interior was a rich cream leather, and the dashboard was a marvel of polished wood and chrome. He was looking for something specific. His daughter, who owned this very car, had a terrible habit of leaving her little orange bottle of arthritis pills in the passenger side door pocket. He'd reminded her a dozen times. He squinted, trying to see past the reflection of the maple tree above him. A few houses down, a woman named Linda was peering through her blinds. She didn't see a man appreciating a fine automobile. She saw a stranger, an older black man, lingering by a car that wasn't his. She saw him leaning close, looking inside. Her heart did a little skip. The news always talked about things like this. She didn't hesitate. She picked up her phone and dialed the non-emergency number. "Hi, yes," she said, her voice a hushed whisper, as if the man could hear her. "There's a man on Elm Street. He looks suspicious. He's been looking into cars for a few minutes now. I don't recognize him. Could you send someone to check?" Over at the Crestview Police Department, the call came in as a routine suspicious person. Officer Dan Colby, 24 years old, with just under a year on the job, was eager. Crestview was quiet, and most calls were about misplaced pets or noisy teenagers. A possible car thief? This was real police work. His partner for the day, Officer Russo, a man in his late 40s with a tired face and a quiet demeanor, drove. Russo had seen 1,000 suspicious person calls turn out to be nothing. Probably someone lost. Or a guy looking at a car he wants to buy, Russo said. His eyes on the road. Maybe, Colby said, adjusting his utility belt. But better safe than sorry, right? Protocol says we investigate. Russo just nodded. He could feel the nervous energy coming off Colby like a radio signal. The young ones always wanted the action. They turned onto Elm Street. The sunlight was dappled through the trees. And there he was, just as the caller described. An elderly black man, dressed nicely, standing by the driver's side window of the green Mercedes. Colby's training kicked in. His mind flipped through scenarios, casing the vehicle, checking for alarms, preparing to break a window. The man's age and dress didn't fit the typical image, but criminals came in all packages. The fact that he was just standing there, not walking away, seemed odd to Colby. Guilty people often fled. Russo pulled the patrol car to a stop a polite distance away. "Let me talk," he said quietly to Colby, but Colby was already opening his door, his boots hitting the pavement with a firm thud. Arthur heard the sound and straightened up, turning slowly, his cane taking his weight. He saw the 2 officers approaching. The younger one was in front, his posture rigid, his hand resting near his belt. The older one hung back slightly, watching. "Afternoon," Arthur said, his voice a low, calm rumble. He offered a small, polite nod. "Afternoon," Colby replied, not returning the smile. "Can I ask what you're doing here, sir?" "Oh, just admiring the automobile," Arthur said, gesturing with his cane toward the Mercedes. "It's a beautiful piece of engineering. 1971, the last of the true classics." "I see," Colby said. He glanced at the car and back at Arthur. "Do you own this vehicle?" Arthur chuckled softly. No, I don't. Just an admirer. Can I see some identification, please?" Arthur's smile faded slightly. He understood the request, but the tone felt off. It wasn't a question. It was a command. He looked past Colby to Officer Russo, seeking a different energy, but Russo's face was neutral, professional. "Of course, officer," Arthur said. He moved his cane to his left hand, and with his right, began to reach slowly into the inside breast pocket of his wool coat. It was a deliberate movement, the movement of a man with stiff joints. To Officer Colby, in his heightened state, the slow reach into the coat was a red flag. The pocket was large. What if it wasn't a wallet? What if it was a weapon? The training videos shouted in his head. Asterisk, control the situation. Assume danger. Asterisk. "Whoa, okay. Just stop right there," Colby said, his voice rising in pitch. He took a half step back, and his right hand went down, his fingers unsnapping the strap over his service weapon. He didn't draw it, but his hand was now on its grip. The world seemed to freeze. Arthur's hand stopped, halfway into his coat. He looked from Colby's tense face to his hand on the gun. A cold wave washed over him, a feeling he knew too well from a lifetime of smaller, quieter moments. Dread, humiliation. The sunny street suddenly felt very dark. Officer Russo stepped forward now. "Sir," he said to Arthur, his voice calm but firm. "Just take your hand out, very slowly. Keep your fingers open. Let's do this one step at a time." Arthur felt his heart hammering against his ribs. The calm, scholarly man was gone, replaced by a raw, primal fear. He did as he was told, pulling his empty hand slowly out of his pocket, his fingers spread wide. "My wallet," he said, his voice tighter now. "It's just my wallet. In my breast pocket." "Okay," Russo said, giving Colby a quick, sharp look. "Okay, with your left hand, very slowly, open your coat for us." With trembling fingers, Arthur used his left hand to pull open the right side of his coat. There, in the silk lining, was a simple brown leather wallet. Colby let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. His hand came off his weapon, but the adrenaline was still coursing through him, making his fingers tingle. "May I?" Russo asked, and he carefully retrieved the wallet. He opened it, finding a state driver's license. The photo showed a serious, dignified Arthur Hawthorne. The address listed was 214 Maple Drive, 3 blocks away. Colby, trying to regain control of the situation, took the license from Russo. He walked back to the patrol car, his legs feeling a bit unsteady. He sat in the passenger seat and called in the information. Then, almost as an afterthought, he ran the license plate of the Mercedes. The radio crackled back. The car was registered to an E. Grant at 1842 Cedar Road, an entirely different part of town. To Colby, this was it. The puzzle piece snapped into place. The man didn't live here. The car wasn't registered here. He was lying. He had to be. The admiring the car story was a cover. This was a car thief, or at least a would-be thief, caught in the act. All of Colby's initial suspicions were confirmed. The fear he'd felt moments ago twisted into a spike of vindication. He wasn't a rookie overreacting. He was a good cop who had sniffed out a crime. He got out of the car, the license in his hand. His walk back to Arthur was different now. More confident, more authoritative. Arthur, who who had been standing perfectly still under Russo's watchful eye, saw the change in the young officer's face immediately. It had hardened. "Mr. Hawthorne," Colby said, not returning the wallet, "this vehicle is registered to an address on Cedar Road. You said you live on Maple. Can you explain why you're so interested in a car that belongs to someone else, all the way over on another street?" Arthur blinked. The question was an accusation. I told you. I admire the car. I was just looking." "Just looking," Colby repeated, his voice flat. He made a decision. "Sir, I'm going to need you to turn around and place your hands on the roof of the vehicle. You're being detained for further investigation." The words hung in the quiet air. A curtain twitched in a house across the street. An elderly woman walking her small dog quickened her pace. Arthur Hawthorne, retired history professor, father, grandfather, pillar of a church, felt the solid ground of his life give way. He was being treated like a criminal on his own daughter's street, in the gentle afternoon sun, for the crime of looking at a beautiful car. Arthur stood frozen for a second, the words echoing in his head. "Place your hands on the roof of the vehicle." They were words from a television show, from a movie, from a nightmare. They did not belong here, on this peaceful street, aimed at him. He looked into the young officer's eyes and saw a wall there. A wall of certainty. This boy, and he was a boy to Arthur, had already decided the story. "Officer," Arthur said, and his voice sounded thin, like paper about to tear. "This is a mistake. A serious mistake." "Please turn around, sir," Colby repeated. He took a step closer. Officer Russo moved to the side, his face unreadable, his body positioned to watch both Arthur and the gathering space of the street. Russo was the backup now, letting his partner run the call. The humiliation began as a hot flush at the base of Arthur's neck. It crawled up over his scalp and down into his chest. His heart, which had been hammering, now felt like a heavy, sick thing flopping in his ribs. He glanced at the house behind the Mercedes. His daughter's house. The curtains were drawn. She was at work. His sanctuary was right there, and he was locked out of it by this absurd scene. Slowly, stiffly, he turned. The cherrywood cane felt like a dead weight in his hand. "My cane," he said quietly. "Place it on the ground," Colby instructed. Arthur bent, his knees protesting with a sharp ache, and laid the cane carefully on the grass boulevard. It felt like surrendering a part of himself. He straightened up, and with a deep sigh that shook his whole frame, he placed his palms flat on the cool, glossy roof of the Mercedes. The metal was smooth under his skin. He fixed his eyes on a small leaf stuck in the windshield wiper. He concentrated on that leaf, on its veins, on its spot of yellow. It was a tiny island in a sea of roaring shame. Colby approached. "I'm going to perform a pat-down for my safety, okay?" Arthur didn't answer. He just stared at the leaf. He felt the officer's hands, brisk and impersonal, moving over his wool coat, down his sides, along his legs. He was searched like a common thief on the street. A sob threatened to climb his throat, but he choked it down. He would not give them that. He would not. Across the street, a front door opened a crack. A man in a sweatshirt stood in the doorway, phone held up. The red recording light was a tiny, accusing eye. Another neighbor, an older woman who sometimes exchanged waves with Arthur on his walks, stood on her porch, her hand over her mouth, the pat-down finished. "Okay, you can stand up straight," Colby said. Arthur pushed himself away from the car. His back ached. He felt 100 years old. He looked for his cane, and Russo, with a glance at Colby, picked it up and handed it back to him. The small act of returning the cane felt like a tiny tear in the fabric of the nightmare. But it was quickly sewn shut. "I'm going to have you sit in the back of the car while we sort this out," Colby said. nodding toward the patrol car. "Am I under arrest?" Arthur asked, finding a last reservoir of strength to make his voice firm. "You are being detained for investigation of possible attempted auto theft," Colby stated. He had practiced these words. They sounded official. They sounded right. "This is my daughter's car," Arthur said, the frustration finally breaking through the shock. "I was checking to see if she left her medicine in it. She has arthritis. She forgets." Colby almost rolled his eyes. It was the oldest, lamest story in the book. Asterisk, it's my friend's car. My brother's car. My daughter's car. Asterisk, he'd heard it all in training. "We'll verify that," he said, his tone making it clear he didn't believe it. "For now, please have a seat in the vehicle." He didn't handcuff Arthur. That was the one concession, perhaps from Russo's silent influence, perhaps because Arthur was elderly and used a cane. But it didn't matter. The walk to the patrol car was the longest walk of Arthur's life. Each step was taken under the gaze of his neighbors, under the unblinking eye of the phone camera. He held his head as high as he could, his jaw clenched so tight it hurt. He would not let them see him cry. Colby opened the back door. The interior was hard plastic and smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. Arthur paused before getting in. He looked at Colby, really looked at him. He saw the eager certainty, the lack of wrinkles around the eyes that come from a life of second-guessing yourself, of understanding how wrong you can be about people. "You are making a very big error." "Son," Arthur said, his voice low and gravelly with emotion. Colby just gestured to the seat. "Please, sir." Arthur lowered himself into the car. The door closed with a solid, heavy thunk. The sound of the lock engaging was deafening. He was in a cage. The world outside the window, his world of maple trees and quiet sidewalks, warped and blurred behind the thick safety glass. He saw the man with the phone lower it, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. He saw the older woman on the porch shake her head and go inside the patrol car. Colby felt a surge of professional pride. He had controlled the situation. He had followed procedure. He had a suspect in custody for a legitimate reason. He turned to Russo. "We should call the registered owner, see if the car's been reported stolen, or if they know this guy." Russo was watching Arthur in the back seat. The old man wasn't slumped in anger. He sat bolt upright, his hands folded over the head of his cane, staring straight ahead. He looked dignified. It was an unsettling sight in the back of a police car. "Something feels off, Dan," Russo said quietly. "His story is specific. The medicine. They're always specific," Colby countered, tapping the license information on his tablet. "It makes the lie sound better. The plate doesn't match his address. That's a fact." Russo shrugged. He'd learned long ago you couldn't talk a young cop out of a certainty. "Make the call." Colby found the number for the registered owner, E. Grant. He put the phone on speaker so Russo could hear. It rang twice, then a woman's voice, pleasant and slightly winded, answered. "Hello? Good afternoon, ma'am. This is Officer Colby with the Crestview Police Department. Am I speaking with the owner of a 1971 green Mercedes-Benz, license plate Juliet-Hotel-Lima-5-5-2? Yes, that's me. Is everything all right? Did something happen to the car?" Her voice was immediately laced with worry. "We're just checking, ma'am. We have an individual here who is seen tampering with the vehicle. We have him detained. Has your car been reported stolen, or did you give anyone permission to be around it today?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Colby smiled at Russo. Asterisk, see? She's confused. She doesn't know him. Asterisk. Then her voice came back, different now. Sharper. Tampering? What do you mean, tampering? Who is this individual? An older gentleman, goes by the name Arthur Hawthorne. Do you know that name, ma'am? Could he be someone you authorized to be with your vehicle? Another pause, longer this time. When Grant spoke again, her voice was cold and clear, each word a chip of ice. Officer, Arthur Hawthorne is my father. He gifted me that car. He lives 3 minutes from me. What exactly are you accusing him of? The air in the front seat of the patrol car vanished. Colby's face went slack. He felt his stomach drop, as if the floor had fallen away. He looked through the partition at the back of Arthur's tweed cap. The puzzle pieces he had so confidently snapped together suddenly blew apart, scattering into a chaotic, horrifying picture. Russo closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose, letting out a long, slow breath that said everything. Ma'am, Colby stammered, his professional voice gone, replaced by a weak stammer. We received a call about a suspicious person. He was looking in the windows. We had to... You had to what? Her voice was rising, a storm building on the other end of the line. You have my father detained? For looking at his own gift to me? Is he all right? Is he hurt? You put your hands on him? No, ma'am. He's not hurt. He's just... Colby's eyes darted to Arthur, sitting in that terrible, patient silence. The truth landed on him then, not as a fact, but as a physical weight. It pressed down on his shoulders, crushed his chest. He saw the slow reach for the wallet, the fear in the old man's eyes when his hand went to his gun, the humiliating pat down on the car roof, the walk to the cage. He had done all of that. To a man checking on his daughter's medicine, you let him go. The woman's voice commanded, crackling through the speaker. You let him go right now. I am on my way. Do you understand me? Right now. The call disconnected. The silence in the front seat was absolute and roaring. Colby slowly lowered the phone. He couldn't look at Russo. He couldn't look at the man in the back seat. He just stared at his own hands, resting on his knees. They were the hands that had frisked a grandfather for being a grandfather. They were shaking. The silence in the patrol car was thick and heavy. Officer Colby stared at his hands. The voice of the woman, Grant, still seemed to echo in the small space. My father. He replayed the call in his head, each word a hammer tap on his skull. He looked at the tablet screen, at the address for Grant, Cedar Road, a different part of town. But of course, a daughter could live in a different part of town from her father. He hadn't considered that. He'd only considered the lie. Officer Russo cleared his throat. It was a rough, tired sound. Well, he said, his voice flat, let's go undo this. Those words broke the spell. Colby felt a jolt of panic. Undo this. You couldn't undo this. He'd already done it. The pat down, the detention, the walk to the car in front of God and everyone. That was all done. He had to face the man now. He had to open that door and say, What? Sorry, my bad? Russo was already getting out of the driver's side. Colby fumbled for the door handle, his fingers slippery. He stepped out into the cool afternoon air. It didn't feel refreshing. It felt like an audience. The man with the phone was gone from the doorway, but Colby knew the video was out there, traveling through the digital veins of the neighborhood. The curtain in the house across the street was still. Someone was watching. Arthur sat perfectly still in the back seat. He hadn't moved a muscle. He'd heard the call, of course. The woman's voice, tinny but clear through the speaker. He'd heard the anger, the protective fire in his daughter's tone. He'd heard the young officer's voice shrink and crack. A part of him, a bitter, wounded part, felt a flicker of dark satisfaction. Now you know. But the larger part of him was just profoundly tired and humiliated. The cage was still a cage, even if the lock was about to click open. Russo, arrived at the back door first. He didn't open it immediately. He looked at Arthur through the glass. For a brief second, their eyes met. Rousseau's gaze held no triumph, no apology either. It was just the look of a man who had seen a mess get made and now had to help clean it up. He nodded once, a small, almost imperceptible dip of his chin. It wasn't much, but it was a human signal in an inhuman situation. And Colby was there, standing beside him, his face pale. He looked like he might be sick. He pressed the button on his belt, and the locks in the car gave a sharp clunk. Rousseau pulled the door open. The outside sounds rushed in. A distant lawnmower, a bird chirping. Arthur didn't move. He just looked up at them, first at Rousseau, then his eyes settled on Colby. He waited. "Mr. Hawthorne," Colby began. His voice was too high, too tight. He swallowed and tried again. "Sir, I've made we received some new information." Arthur said nothing. He just kept looking at him. The silence was a weight, and Colby struggled under it. We contacted the registered owner of the vehicle. A Ms. Grant." He said the name like it was a foreign word. "She has, confirmed your relationship. She's your daughter." Arthur gave the smallest of nods. "Yes, I know. So," Colby continued, forcing the words out, "the situation, the misunderstanding, has been clarified. You are free to go. You're not being detained any longer." The official words were out. "You are free to go." Arthur thought they should feel like a key turning, like shackles falling away. But they didn't. They felt like ash in the air. He finally moved, shifting his weight to grip his cane. He slowly swung his legs out of the car and, with an effort that made his joints creak, stood up on the sidewalk. He was taller than Colby. He looked down at the young officer, who couldn't seem to meet his eye anymore. "Is that all?" Arthur asked. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the nervous energy around Colby like a knife. Colby flinched. I need to offer you my sincere apology for the inconvenience, sir." Inconvenience. The word hung in the air. Arthur almost laughed, but it would have been a terrible sound. Being treated like a criminal on his own street, having his body searched, being locked in a cage, an inconvenience. Like a delayed train. Like a spilled coffee. He didn't address the apology. He looked past Colby, to the green Mercedes, to his daughter's house. "My cane," he said, though he was holding it. He was talking about his dignity, his place in this world, and they all knew it. Rousseau stepped in, his tone more practical. "Sir, we can give you a ride home. Or to your daughter's, if you prefer. It's no trouble." Arthur shook his head. A ride in that car? The thought made his skin crawl. "I will walk." "Of course," Rousseau said. He glanced at Colby, who was just standing there, paralyzed. Arthur took a step, then paused. He turned back to Colby. The young officer finally looked up, his eyes wide with a dread that was deepening by the second. This wasn't ending with an apology. Arthur wasn't letting it. "Officer," Arthur said, and his voice was different now. It was the voice he used in a quiet classroom, when a student had said something thoughtless but revealing. It was calm, probing, and utterly devastating. "Can I ask you a question?" Colby nodded, mute. "What was the piece of information?" Arthur began, speaking slowly. "That changed my story for you? Was it my daughter's voice on the phone? Was it her word?" Colby opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "Because," Arthur continued, his gaze unwavering, "I told you it was my daughter's car. I told you I was checking for medicine. My words, coming from me, did not change anything. They just made you more sure I was lying. My ID, with my address on it, did not change anything. It just made you run the plate. "The color of my skin," he said, and he said it plainly, without heat, just as a fact. That didn't change. That was the first piece of information you had, from the moment you got that call. A suspicious black man. And that piece of information, ... It colored everything else, didn't it? It colored how you saw my clothes, how you heard my voice, how you interpreted me reaching for my wallet. My daughter's word was the key that fit your lock. But the lock itself, you built that. Each sentence was a gentle, precise tap, and with each tap, a crack spread through Colby's certainty. He wanted to argue. He wanted to say it was procedure. It was the mismatched addresses. It was the caller's report. But the old man's eyes held him, and in their deep brown reflection, Colby didn't see a thief or a liar. He saw a man who had lived a long life and knew exactly what had just happened to him, because versions of it had happened before. He saw the profound disappointment of a teacher whose pupil had failed the most basic test of humanity. Colby's mouth was dry. He tried to say, "It wasn't like that," but the lie choked him. Because it was exactly like that. The call had painted a picture, and he had spent every second since then filling in the lines with his own assumptions, his own ingrained fears. He had not seen a man. He had seen a stereotype, and he had acted on it with the full power of his badge. The weight of it, the sheer, stupid, irreversible wrongness of it crashed down on him all at once. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a failure of his purpose. He was supposed to protect people. He had terrorized one. The shame was immediate and physical. It felt like a hot flood in his chest, rising up his throat. And then a more basic animal signal overrode everything. The adrenaline that had been pumping through him since the call, the fight-or-flight juice that had made him draw his hand to his gun, that had made his voice sharp, that had fueled his professional detachment. It had to go somewhere. His body, overwhelmed by the psychological tsunami, short-circuited dot, he felt a sudden, warm, uncontrollable release in his bladder. It was instant and total. A dark, spreading stain bloomed rapidly on the gray fabric of his uniform trousers, from the crotch down the inner seam of his legs. The warmth was a shocking contrast to the cold dread in his heart. He froze. His eyes went wide with a new, different horror. He looked down, then quickly back up at Arthur, hoping against hope the old man hadn't noticed. But Arthur had noticed. His eyes flickered down for a fraction of a second, then back up to Colby's face. There was no smirk, no smile of vengeance. If anything, the disappointment in his eyes deepened, mixed now with a kind of pity. This boy had not just broken protocol. He had broken himself. Officer Russo saw it too. He saw the stain, saw the utter devastation on his partner's face. He moved quickly, stepping slightly in front of Colby, as if to shield him from the view of the street, though it was far too late. "Mr. Hawthorne," Russo said, his voice firmer now, trying to reclaim control of a situation that had spiraled into something awful and deeply private. "We are truly sorry for this experience. It should not have happened. There will be an internal review. You have my word on that." Arthur gave one last, long look at the shattered young officer standing in a puddle of his own making. He saw the trembling hands, the pale face, the eyes brimming with tears of shame. This was not a victory. It was a tragedy. A small, stupid, human tragedy. Without another word, Arthur Hawthorne turned. He planted his cherrywood cane firmly on the sidewalk of Elm Street, and he began the long, slow walk home, leaving the two officers and the gleaming green Mercedes behind. He didn't look back. The click of his cane on the pavement was the only sound, a steady, retreating beat in the silent afternoon. For a long minute after Arthur walked away, the world on Elm Street seemed to hold its breath. The only movement was the gentle sway of the maple tree and the dark, damp patch slowly spreading on Officer Colby's trousers. He stood frozen, staring at the spot on the sidewalk where Arthur had been. His mind was a roaring white noise of Shane. Officer Russo broke the silence. He didn't say a word about what had just happened. He put a firm hand on Colby's elbow, a grip that was part support, part steering. "Get in the car," he said, his voice low and devoid of all emotion. "Passenger side." Colby moved like a robot, his legs stiff. He could feel the wet fabric clinging to his skin, cold now in the breeze. The warmth was gone, leaving only the ugly, undeniable evidence. He fumbled with the door handle and practically fell into the seat. He kept his thighs pressed tightly together, as if he could hide it, make it disappear. Russo got in the driver's side. He didn't start the engine right away. He just sat there, hands on the wheel, looking straight ahead at the quiet, accusing street. Finally, he spoke, still not looking at Colby. "That," he said, "is what they call a catastrophic failure of judgment." Colby opened his mouth, but a weak, choked sound was all that came out. He wanted to explain, to list the facts, the call, the plate, the reach for the wallet. But the words felt hollow now, pathetic excuses that would only make the hole he was in deeper. The physical proof of his humiliation was seeping into the car seat. "We are going back to the station," Russo said, starting the engine. "You will go directly to the locker room. You will change. You will then sit at your desk and write your report. You will write every single detail. Do you understand? Every word, every action, starting with the tone of the dispatcher's call." The drive back was a blur of silent torture. Every stop sign, every red light felt like an eternity under a microscope. Colby was sure every person in every passing car was staring at his lap. He kept his arms folded tightly over it. He watched the familiar streets of his town roll by, the town he was supposed to serve and protect. It all looked different now, hostile. He saw the faces of the neighbors on Elm Street in his mind, the phone recording, the old woman's hand over her mouth. And over all of it, the calm, devastated face of Arthur Hawthorne. Back at the precinct, Russo parked near the back. "Go. Now," he instructed. Colby hurried out, head down, and took the back stairs to the locker room. It was mercifully empty. He stood in front of his locker, his fingers trembling so badly he could barely work the combination. He got it open, pulled out his gym bag, and found a pair of gray sweatpants. Changing out of the soiled uniform felt like shedding a skin of failure. He balled the trousers up, shoving them deep into the bag, out of sight. But he couldn't hide from the smell of his own shame or the cold, clammy feeling on his skin. He walked out to the main bullpen, a room of desks and humming computers. A few other officers looked up. One, an older detective, gave him a curious glance, taking in the sweatpants. "Jim Day, Colby?" he asked lightly. Colby just shook his head, unable to speak, and went to his desk. He sank into his chair. The report. He opened a new document on his computer. The blank screen glared at him. Incident report. He typed the date. His hands hovered over the keys. Where did it start? Did it start with the call? Or did it start earlier, somewhere in his own mind, in things he'd heard and seen and never questioned? He began to type, the words coming in stutters. Asterisk dispatched to a 10 to 65 suspicious person on Elm Street. Subject was an elderly black male. Subject was observed looking into vehicle window. Asterisk, he got to the part about asking for ID. He stared at the sentence. Subject reached into his interior coat pocket. He deleted it. He wrote, Asterisk subject moved his hand toward his interior coat pocket in a slow manner. I perceived a potential threat and instructed him to stop. Asterisk. He read it back. It sounded so clinical, so justified. And it was a lie. It was a lie, he told himself in the moment, and he was writing it down to make it official. The face of Arthur, frozen in fear, flashed before his eyes. He deleted the whole paragraph. He put his head in his hands. Across the room, Russo was at the sergeant's desk, talking in a low, serious voice. The sergeant, a broad man with a shaved head and a perpetual frown, listened, his expression growing darker with every word. He looked over at Colby, his gaze like a weight. Colby looked away quickly. A few minutes later, the sergeant stood up and walked over. He pulled a chair from a neighboring desk and sat down heavily next to Colby. He didn't say anything at first, just let the silence stretch. Colby could feel the man's eyes on him. "Russo gave me the broad strokes," the sergeant finally said. His voice was quiet, which was somehow worse than if he'd been yelling. "I've already seen the video, son." Colby's head snapped up. "Video?" "From a neighbor. It's on a community page. It's not great quality, but it's clear enough. It shows you patting down an old man in a tweed cap. It shows you putting him in the car." The sergeant leaned forward. "What it doesn't show is the context." "It doesn't show why?" "Russo says you had a plate mismatch." "That true?" "Yes, Sarge," Colby whispered. "The car was registered to a different address." "I thought—" "You thought you had a car thief," the sergeant finished for him. He sighed, a long, weary sound. "And the registered owner is his daughter." "Yes, sir." "And you found this out after you put him in the car." "Yes, sir." The sergeant nodded slowly, absorbing it. "And the subject's demeanor?" "From the start?" Colby closed his eyes. "Polite, confused. He said he was just looking at the car. He said it was his daughter's. But you didn't believe him. The facts didn't line up, Sarge." Colby said, a hint of desperate defense creeping into his voice. "The caller said he was suspicious. The plate was wrong. The facts," the sergeant said, making air quotes with his fingers, "are only as good as the brain interpreting them. Did you ask him for the daughter's name? Did you ask him for her address? Did you do anything to verify his story before you decided to treat a 70-year-old man like a perp on COPS?" Colby had no answer. He hadn't asked. He had already decided. "The video's got about 50 comments already," the sergeant continued, his voice grim. "People are asking for your badge number. The local news station's tip line has probably been called. And the worst part? The worst part isn't even the video. It's what's about to walk through that door." As if on cue, the front door of the precinct buzzed open. A woman stormed in. She was in her 40s, dressed in professional slacks and a blouse, her face a mask of fury and worry. It was Grant, Arthur's daughter. She scanned the room, and her eyes locked onto Colby. She started toward him. The sergeant stood up, interposing himself. "Ma'am, can I help you?" "Are you in charge?" she demanded, her voice shaking with anger. "That officer," she pointed a sharp finger at Colby, "that officer harassed, humiliated, and illegally detained my father. Where is he? Is he here? I want to see him now. Your father was released, ma'am. He chose to walk home." "Walk home?" Her voice cracked. "After what you put him through? He's 72. He has a heart condition. What if he'd had an episode? What then?" She was crying now, tears of rage streaking down her face. "You treated him like an animal. For looking at a car he bought for me. Do you have any idea what that does to a person? Any idea at all?" Her words filled the quiet room. Every officer at every desk was listening, pretending not to. Colby wished the floor would open up and swallow him. He saw not just an angry daughter, but the human consequence of his actions. The fear, the worry, the shattered sense of safety. "Ma'am, we are conducting a full internal investigation," the sergeant said, trying to project calm. "I assure you, Your assurances mean nothing. She cut him off. I want his name. I want his badge number. I am filing a formal complaint. And I am calling a lawyer. This isn't over. You don't get to do this to people and just say sorry. She turned her fiery gaze back to Colby, who had shrunk in his chair. You, she spat the word. You should not be wearing that uniform. With that, she turned on her heel and marched out, the door slamming shut behind her with a final, echoing bang. The silence that followed was heavier than before. The sergeant looked down at Colby, who was staring at his own trembling hands in his lap. Go home, Colby, the sergeant said, his voice now just tired. You're on administrative leave, effective immediately. Do not speak to anyone about this. Do not post anything. Do not even think about talking to the media. Your union rep will be in touch. Go. Colby stood up. His legs felt like water. He walked past the desks, feeling the eyes of his colleagues on his back. He heard the low murmur start up as soon as he was through the door to the back stairs. The story was out. It was bigger than him now. It was a video, a complaint, a news story, a family's trauma. He drove home in his personal car, the sweatpants a constant reminder. He walked into his empty apartment and went straight to the bathroom. He looked at himself in the mirror. His face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed. He saw the boy Arthur had called him. A scared, stupid boy playing cop who had caused a world of hurt because he couldn't see a man. Only a suspicion dot. He took his phone from his pocket. It was buzzing with notifications, texts from friends who'd seen the video, probably. He didn't read them. He opened the browser and typed Crestview Police and Elm Street. The first link was the local community forum. The video was right. The story did not end. It rippled out, turning private shame into public noise. By the next morning, the shaky cell phone video from Elm Street was no longer just on a neighborhood page. A local news station had picked it up. They didn't have the full story yet, just the arresting images. An elderly, well-dressed black man being patted down against a luxury car and led to a police cruiser. The Chiron read, Detention of elderly man sparks community outrage. The comments on the article were a torrent of anger and speculation. Officer, Colby's administrative leave was a form of purgatory. He was stuck in his apartment, blinds drawn, jumping at every ping from his phone. The official letter from the department was cold and legal. It outlined the allegations: unlawful detention, failure to properly de-escalate, conduct unbecoming. His union rep, a gruff man named Finn, told him not to worry yet, that these things happened, that procedure would be followed. But Finn's voice lacked conviction. He'd seen the video too. The second news story aired 2 days later. This one had more details. The reporter had spoken to Arthur's daughter. She was composed now, her anger refined into a sharp, clear statement. This was not a mistaken procedure, she said, looking directly into the camera. This was a failure of humanity. My father was guilty of being a black man who dared to appreciate a beautiful car on a public street. The officer saw a story written by prejudice, and he acted it out. Then the reporter revealed the detail that turned the story from an outrage into a viral humiliation. Sources within the police department confirm that upon realizing his profound error, the officer in question became so distressed that he suffered a documented physical panic reaction at the scene. They didn't say he'd wet himself. They didn't have to. The internet filled in the blanks. Memes were made. Colby's name, though not officially released, was whispered everywhere in town. He was the cop who peed his pants. The brutal comedy of it overshadowed the tragedy. It made him a punchline, which was in some ways worse than being a villain. He couldn't even claim the grim dignity of being hated for a principled, if wrong, stand. He was just a fool, A scared boy who'd messed up so badly his own body betrayed him. He stopped looking at the news. He tried to go for a run at night, wearing a hoodie, but he felt exposed under every streetlight. He saw a man walking a dog look at him twice, and he hurried home, his heart hammering. The uniform he had been so proud of was now a costume of shame he could never wear again, even in his mind. Across town, in a quiet, oak-lined house, Arthur Hawthorne was trying to find peace. His daughter had wanted him to stay with her, but he needed his own walls, his own things. The house was full of the smell of old paper and the tea his wife used to drink. He moved through the rooms slowly. His body was fine. His heart, thankfully, had remained steady. But his mind kept replaying the loop, the shadow of the patrol car falling over him, the feel of the cold roof under his palms, the clunk of the car door lock. The look on the young officer's face at the end, that was what haunted him most. The sheer, total unraveling. Arthur felt no victory in it. He felt a deep, weary sadness. He had been a lesson in a lesson that officer would never forget. And being a lesson is a dehumanizing thing. His friends from church called. His former colleagues from the university called. They offered support. They cursed the police. They praised his dignity. He thanked them, but their anger felt like a blanket that was too heavy. His daughter brought over food and sat with him in silence, her hand over his. She talked about lawsuits, about justice. He listened, but he was tired of battle. He had fought smaller versions of this battle his whole life. This one had just been played out on a larger, crueler stage. A week after the incident, a certified letter arrived. It was from the Crestview Police Department. It was a formal apology signed by the chief of police. It acknowledged the egregious error, the trauma inflicted, and the breach of public trust. It stated that Officer Daniel Colby was on leave pending a full review, and that all personnel would undergo renewed implicit bias training. The language was careful, legal, and empty. It was words trying to clean up a mess that couldn't be cleaned. Arthur read it once, then placed it in a drawer. An apology from an institution, he thought, was like rain falling on a stone. It might wet the surface, but it doesn't soften what's underneath. What he didn't expect was the second letter, which arrived 2 days later in a plain envelope with no return address. The handwriting was shaky, almost childish. Asterisk, Mr. Hawthorne, asterisk, asterisk, you don't have to read this. You probably shouldn't. I am the officer. I have no right to write to you. They told me not to. Asterisk, asterisk, I am not writing to ask for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I am writing because I need to say to you what I couldn't say on the street. Asterisk, asterisk, you asked me what piece of information changed my story. You were right. It was my story from the beginning. I heard the call and I saw a character in my head. I let fear and stupid pride make me the hero in a story that wasn't real. I stopped seeing a person. I saw a problem to solve. Asterisk, asterisk, what I did to you was wrong. It was cruel. It was the opposite of everything I swore to do. I took your dignity because I was too scared and too arrogant to question myself. I am so ashamed I can barely breathe sometimes. Asterisk, asterisk, I am not a victim. You are. I am just the person who caused it. I will have to live with that for the rest of my life. I wanted you to know that I know what I did. I am sorry for the hurt. I am sorry for the fear. I am sorry for not seeing you. Asterisk, asterisk, it doesn't fix anything. Nothing can. Asterisk, asterisk, D. Colby asterisk Arthur read it 3 times. He sat in his armchair by the window, the letter resting on his knee. The anger he had been holding on to, the cold stone of it, didn't melt, but it shifted. He saw not the officer on the street, but a broken young man alone in a room, grappling with a monster of his own making. The letter wasn't an excuse. It was a confession. It was the one human thing in all this mess. He didn't know what to do with it. He didn't reply. To offer forgiveness felt cheap, unearned. To condemn him further felt pointless. The man was condemning himself far more effectively than anyone else could. The final news story was a brief update. Officer Daniel Colby has resigned from the Crestview Police Department, effective immediately. The internal investigation is closed. The department again expresses its sincere regret to the Hawthorne family. And that was that. The news cycle moved on. There was a new scandal, a new outrage. One afternoon, when the light was gold and long, Arthur went out to his backyard. It was a small, well-tended space with a patch of grass and rosebush his wife had planted years ago. They were past their bloom, the petals brown and fallen. He took his shears and began the careful work of deadheading, cutting away the old blooms to make room for new growth. His hands, the same hands that had been patted down, worked slowly and methodically. The thorns pricked his skin, a small, sharp pain that felt clean and real. He thought about the young man, Colby. Where was he now? What would he become, carrying that weight? Arthur hoped, in a way that surprised him, that the weight wouldn't crush him, but would teach him how to be light with other people. It was a generous hope, and it cost him something to feel it. Inside, on the kitchen table, his daughter's lawyer's number was written on a notepad. The civil suit was moving forward. It would mean money, an official finding of fault. It was the way of the world. Arthur knew he would probably agree to it, for her sake, for principle's sake. But out here with the roses, it felt distant. This was the aftermath. Not a conclusion, but a living with. For Arthur, a life now framed by a before and an after, marked by a quiet vigilance that would never fully leave him. For the officer, a life forever defined by a single, catastrophic failure on a sunny street. Two lives, forever altered by a few minutes of fear and assumption, orbiting the same painful event, but alone in their separate silences. The system had issued its reports, the news had moved on, but the human hearts involved were just beginning the long, slow work of figuring out how to beat around the hole that had been torn in them.